Mr. Lloyd, looking back on the Suez Crisis of 1956, what, in your opinion, are the lessons to be learned from that period in modern history?
I think it is possible to learn certain lessons and to perhaps draw a provisional conclusion after 10 years. The first lesson, I would say, is that the aggressor has to be recognized and tackled. In 1956, Colonel Nasser had not only seized the Suez Canal in breach of his own solemn undertakings given to Britain in 1954 and to the Suez Canal Company in 1956, he was also pursuing a policy in the execution of which statements that he intended to destroy the State of Israel were accompanied by a carefully organized campaign of physical violence, of murder and destruction across the frontier. Yet some people still talk as though Israel's preventive action of October 1956 was aggression. I have never accepted that view. France and Britain were right to veto the Security Council resolution condemning Israel as an aggressor. It was Nasser who was the aggressor. And I think it's interesting to remember that Mr. Hugh Gaitskell it was who likened him to Hitler. I think the second lesson is that the United Nations is powerless unless the permanent members of the Security Council are in agreement. Korea is sometimes quoted as an example of successful United Nations action. Well, I believe that the United States would have acted in Korea whatever the United Nations had said or done. Fortunately, it could become a United Nations action because by a stroke of luck, the Russians were sulking and not attending Security Council meetings at the time, and so there was no veto. The Russians have never made the same mistake since. In the case of the Arab-Israel dispute, there never was unanimity about enforcing Security Council resolutions. There never was unanimity among the permanent members. There had been innumerable debates, debate after debate, I think over 200 of them, but with no result. And I do not think that any effective action to protect Israel would ever have been taken, certainly not in time. Even our efforts to increase the number of United Nations people watching the frontiers had failed. Thirdly, when the United Nations is impotent, states are entitled to act in self-defense and to restore order and stability. To quote from a recent article in the Sunday Times on Suez, the United States of America's exclamations of righteous indignation make curious reading today against a background of their adventures in Cuba, Santo Domingo, Vietnam, and even Guatemala. And one might add, against their attitude to the Panama Canal. In the Lebanon and Jordan in 1958, when the United States and Britain acted in concert, their action was strikingly successful and maintained stability. Those, I think, are three of the lessons. As for the provisional conclusion, the result of what happened in 1956, for Israel, the rewards of the Sinai campaign were considerable. United Nations occupation of the Gaza Strip, freedom of passage for Israeli ships up the Gulf of Aqaba, and the deflating of Nasser's military might. Britain and France suffered a diplomatic defeat in that almost every other government was ranged against them. And because of that, the opportunity for a permanent settlement of Arab-Israeli relations was lost. Nasser's seizure of the canal was accepted. The Middle East still has many troubles. There are dangers to peace, and in the Yemen, a savage war has been proceeding for years. But I doubt whether any fair-minded person dare claim that if no military action had taken place in 1956, the Middle East would have been safer or more stable today.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.